Hey everybody, Stippling here with a look at set number 75119, Sergeant Jyn Erso, a Star Wars Rogue One character released in the fall 2016 wave of Buildable Figures. This box is the least dense in terms of parts, having a mere 104 pieces. Let's go ahead and see what's inside the box. The instructions run all the way up to page 35. Then we have a quick outline of all the Rogue One sets, a little mini poster there, and that is all. Narrowing down our focus on only new or interesting parts, we have still quite a lot of parts to go through, so I'll do my best to go through these as quick as we can. Let's start with the stars of the show, no pun intended. These new armor shells. These are large and rounded. This also solves the huge problem that these Star Wars action figures have, in that it gives more coverage on larger bone pieces. That's been a constant problem for Lego, to fill out those sections of the body. You get two of those in this set in black. Another wonderful thing I wasn't expecting is this torso chest plate piece. This is a completely new mold that has never been made before, and it's designed sleeker and more feminine than anything we've seen previously. Even Rey from The Force Awakens didn't get this treatment. It's a little bit stereotypical in the proportions, but I think it looks good overall without going too far in any one direction. This is a dark gray piece with printing on top. Jyn's head is a little bit of an anomaly to me. I like the way it looks, though I don't feel it necessarily represents what I've seen thus far in the trailers. She's shown either with her hair exposed or with a hood on. At long last, we have one of the most basic colors in an armor shell. We have dark gray, so you get two of those in size 4 and 3 of them in size 5. Continuing on with our recolors, we have two hand pieces, and these are in dark tan. This is a fairly new element. It was released in the Star Wars Force Awakens line. I believe it's a dark brown. It's like a chestnut brown. I don't know the precise coloring, Lego coloring, so feel free to put that in the comments, but it is a new color. Okay, this is a single Baraki eye in black. Also in black is the hilt portion of Kylo Ren's lightsaber from the construction line. This is a fairly new piece. It's an axle with stopper size 3, and they're kind of hard to come by, so the fact that this has 7 in them is pretty phenomenal. This is just your average Technic lift arm in light bluish gray, but when I looked at the instructions and looked at the pictures up close, to me, and it's right there, it looked like a Lego brick. And I was fascinated by that and how they managed to connect that. But as it turns out, it's not a Lego brick, it's just a Technic lift arm with a half-size pin inside there. That really played a trick on my eyes. That was interesting and slightly disappointing. So those are our parts. Let's go ahead and get to building. The designated pin cushion. This is really hard to get in. Alright, there we go. It's just so magical how that connects together. Double trouble. I heard you wanted some friction. Okay, not that much friction. Not as easy. See that axle sticking out? Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Look how snug that fits on there. And you guys say my character's legs are too long. Those are some frog legs. Heads up. Barbie, is that you? Billy, meet my good friend Club. It's like they're slowly adding system pieces to our construction figures, and they're hoping we don't notice, and eventually they'll just disappear. Pretty creative. Not a Lego brick. Oh. Commence one-handed sniper rifle. We did it! I actually forgot to put these bushings on the billy clubs in the build, so let's go ahead and add those in. One there, and one there. Sorry about that. So this is Jyn Erso, fully completed. The build itself was not a complicated process. It was pretty standard if you've ever built a Star Wars CCBS action figure, in particular the ones previously released in winter of 2016. It's a pretty standard build. You got the gearbox ingrained inside the torso, normal bone pieces for the arms and legs, and then a custom weapon of some kind to kind of make them unique. That being said, even though this is the classic, quote-unquote classic build for the Star Wars line, I feel as though they did an excellent job of covering the figure. It just looks completely covered from head to toe, at some times to the detriment of posability, which we'll get to later. But I think it looks good and it's a great shelf model. I think the designer really took a lot of effort to try to make this figure not only have a feminine appearance, but also maintain a cohesive shape regardless of its gender. As stated previously, Jyn has the gearbox completely integrated inside her torso. So if you actually uncover this exceptionally well-detailed torso, you can see the mechanisms inside. You basically just turn the knob and those joints rotate opposite one another, so it kind of creates this chopping mechanism on each side. There's also a gear here which connects to the gear on the knob, which creates enough friction to more or less hold it in any pose you choose. Now the funny thing regarding this gearing mechanism is it's virtually useless for a gun. Without a bayonet, you're not going to be slashing or punching or attacking with the weapon itself. You'd be carefully and cautiously aiming it. I have found a pretty hilarious alternative as to why this gearing mechanism's on Jyn Erso, and that is because her gun is jammed. So by smacking the gun, not unlike Han Solo would smack the side of the Millennium Falcon to get it working again, by smashing her gun, she can actually force it to fire. I don't know if you saw that. Let's try that again. While looking at the gun, you can tell that the firing mechanism is actually within the scope itself. By pushing the scope down, you can fire the bolt out, and you do get a spare one in case you inevitably lose this down a air duct or something. The actual scope is kind of loose, and also it requires some finessing to get the bolt to go in. If you just try to push it in, it's not going to work. You have to kind of align the scope forward, and then lock it into place. Now the actual construction of the blaster rifle is built upside down from the actual designed intended purpose of the molding. I think that's a pretty unique choice, and it allows for some interesting shaping that we wouldn't have got had it been flipped around. There's really not many attachment points on this side of the gun. The actual purpose, shot one off. Okay, the actual purpose of the action feature is for these, what they refer to as truncheons, or what I like to call billy clubs. You can place these in her hands like so, and you can also actually attach the sniper rifle or blaster rifle to her back on either port or either axle hole that the billy clubs were attached to. Unfortunately, this kind of gets in the way of the gearing, especially this knob here, so for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to put that to the side. What's unfortunate about these billy clubs is, what I believe was intended is they have literally no friction in them. There's no pin holding this, it's an axle in a pinhole, so zero friction or imperceptible amount of friction involved here. So while that sounds cool in theory, in practice, when you actually use her gearing mechanism as intended with these billy clubs, they just start to fling wildly and you end up hitting her more than you hit your opponent. Ow, 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 ow. So that being said, I feel like this gearing mechanism is pretty silly on this figure. I do appreciate it, but I almost like my iteration of the jammed blaster rifle more than these billy clubs that have no friction. Another downside to the lack of friction in these billy clubs is when you attach them to her back, they sort of just want to fall down. Gravity doesn't like to hold them upright. It's unfortunate because in a lot of the trailer footage we've seen thus far, you can see her clubs kind of protruding out of her back like that. So they are there, they do exist, but there's no good way to do that without kind of crossing them and kind of bending them a bit, which can have some decent results, but puts a lot of strain on the parts, and I would not keep it that way for long. As I stated previously, I think the head looks good, it's just not a perfect representation of the character or actress that plays Jyn Erso. It does look decent, it definitely has feminine qualities to it, but with most of these humanoid figures, they just tend to look lifeless to me. They have kind of glazed looks in their eyes and don't quite have the life in them that some of the more mechanical alternatives have. Due to this back armor, which provides the ball joint for the head, she suffers from some limited posability on her head. She's able to look to the right only to about there, and to the left equally as far. So she really can't look over her shoulder in any way. She can look down pretty far, and that's due to the fact that there's this gap in the actual molding of it. There's a similar gap here, but there's almost like a spine-like element that must be for durability, which really limits the upward angling of the head. She literally can only slightly tilt her head from a frontward position, which is pretty pathetic, especially if she's looking up at an AT-AT crawling at her. Moving down further to her arms and torso, I think this is just a perfect looking build. Everything is very cohesive. The only exposed areas are at the shoulders and at the elbows if you do not bend her arms. If you bend her arms, she's completely covered. However, the problem with having such a cohesively built figure is the posability becomes extremely limited. This ball joint is really at the absolute closest to the torso it can be. That really limits posability. She can kind of flail her arm up like that. She can move it up and down like that. But if you want her to bend her arm over her chest, you really can't do that without breaking things. It's a trade-off. I think they went for aesthetically pleasing this time over functionally perfect. Going to the legs, I'm a little disappointed with how that new armor piece played out. I had hoped that it would really cover everything pretty well, and it does do a good job of coverage, but to me, if you're going to mold a custom piece, you really want to ensure that it really locks in everything. I feel as though the way they designed this armor piece does a good job of allowing posability, but I feel like it didn't accomplish what they set out to do, especially at angles like this. This just really detracts from the nice shaping of the torso. So it's a constant game for Lego. Do we create a good-looking figure with no gaps, or do we create a gappy figure with a lot of posability? And it just seems like the top part of the character they chose aesthetic, and the bottom part of the figure they chose function and posability. The legs do have a really nice range of posability. There's nothing really you can't do with them. So that is a really good thing. Now, I kind of mentioned it in the build, but the length of these legs is enormous. It's not abnormal for Lego to use legs this long, and they are not out of the realm of possibilities for human shaping, but they are really, really long, and they kind of look out of place when you compare it to the length of the torso. To their credit, Lego's been doing a really good job of adding coverage to the backs of these figures. So with the inclusion of this new back plating, length 5 armor shell, as well as these more rounded shells, they've really covered the entire figure. They even continue the trend of using some system curved pieces to create sort of a calf on the back of the leg. As for size comparison, we're going to compare the female lead of Rogue One, which is Jyn Erso, to the female lead of Star Wars The Force Awakens, Rey. As you can tell, Jyn Erso is slightly taller, and that has absolutely nothing to do with the legs. The legs themselves are built up very, very similar in terms of skeletal structure, The major difference being the actual upper torso, which rests a bit higher on Jyn Erso than Rey. As I said before, I feel like they're intentionally covering the heads of these female characters, either due to limitations in molding or the weirdness of anything they've tried in terms of female hair. It may just look too fake or too plasticky. I'm not sure what the reasoning for that would be. So that's my take on Captain Jyn Erso. I think Lego is moving in the right direction in terms of making these characters look more humanoid. They're looking less and less robotic with each generation of Star Wars buildable figures, and I think they finally kind of hit their peak to where it really stops looking like a robot and I can see the human figure in it. The unfortunate side effect is I feel as though hiding the bone pieces, hiding the internal constructions is really limiting articulation. So if they can kind of find a perfect balance with that, I would be much happier. I wish the billy clubs could have some friction in them so I could get more dynamic poses with her. I also wish I didn't shoot myself in the face so many times shooting this video with her gun. That scope is just a little bit too loose. But, like I said, this is a pretty cool figure. If nothing else, it's a great parts pack. There's lots of variety of new parts and a huge collection of established parts that you can add to your collection. So I definitely recommend buying this one, building it. If you like it, keep it. If you don't like it, enjoy all the new parts. So those are just my thoughts. Do you think Lego's headed in the right direction with these action figures? What do you think about the action feature and which weapon do you think should be held while using it? Lastly, do you feel as though the legs are an appropriate length, and do you feel as though their shaping helps or hinders the overall figure's appearance and functionality? I look forward to hearing answers to everything I've just asked and more, and as always, I appreciate you all and thanks for watching.